Instructional models can vary widely. While some may focus on how to make the lesson plans and others focus on the delivery of the content itself, the Dick and Carey instructional design model follows a more traditional systemic approach. For your assignment this week, create a 2 to 3 minute podcast to demonstrate your understanding of the Dick and Carey model. You can use any of the following free audio recording software tools: a PowerSoft, Voice Recorder, Audacity. Your submission should address the following critical elements: a summary of the different stages, an example of use for each stage, and a summary of your impression of Dick and Carey to meet your instructional design and development needs. After you've completed your recording, upload a 2 to 3 minute audio file either in WAV or MP3 to complete this assignment. If you are unable to complete an audio recording, upload a 2-page transcript addressing each critical element. I thought it would be most appropriate to actually illustrate this lesson in the form of a podcast as opposed to a video that you've been looking at over the past few modules and throughout the course. So I wanted to talk to you about a couple of different things regarding the different types of podcasts, and I also wanted to talk about some specific implementation strategies for learning, because the activity that you have this week is also based on some of the activities that are here. And I think you'll be able to find this podcast to be beneficial for ideas or any type of creative work you'll have in order to meet that objective. So the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about the types of podcasts. And there are 4 different types of podcasts that are readily used for educating and informing other people's. The most common podcast that you're going to see is a solo podcast, and that's an example of what you're listening to here. Solo podcast essentially is a designated content expert or designated person with professional experience or working knowledge within a process or topic that is delivering information in a one-way manner. And I think that's probably one of the solutions you'll look for when you are designing your learning activity for this module will be the creation or use of a solo podcast. The other podcast that is really common and really popular is an interview podcast. And for those of you that remember the IDT200 course with the module 6 on the ISD processes, I actually did an interview podcast there, and that was myself as the moderator interviewing a subject matter expert that was sharing her knowledge within a specific industry of ISD that was based on her interpretation, her knowledge, and her experience of those topics. So an interview podcast will be another very popular solution you can look for a learning strategy solution in this week's assignment. So those are the 2 that are going to be the most popular. The multi-host podcast is going to be very similar to the podcast that you see with the interview. Essentially, you have designated roles that are talking about specific areas. In theory, a modern form of a multi-host podcast essentially is listening to a radio show. You're listening to people talk about their perspectives, their experiences, and their knowledge based on topics that have been presented to them. So you're going to see interviews that take place with them. You're going to see designated forums. It can be panel groups. A lot of this is just done on an on-demand basis for podcasting that is still very highly effective in use today, with the ability to add an RSS, which stands for really simple syndication, and alert people that subscribe to those podcasts for new information that's there. So the multi-host podcast is very similar to the interview podcast and just an expansion of knowledge base that's across the forum. The last podcast is a vodcast, vidcast, or essentially what is known as a video podcast. And you're going to see these, to some degree, a good example of these would be the weekly overview modules that you've seen in this course and the other courses in the MicroMaster certificate program. It's introducing concepts that are related specifically to the module for that week. It's a summation of the processes and topics that you'll be looking at. And it's my perspective as the designer of those areas to share just a real brief overview and adding some video narration to it, just a little bit of digital media enhancements that goes along with those. So those are the 4 most common types of podcasts that you're going to see used within learning and training and development. Now let's talk about some implementation strategies. Podcasting gives you a lot of capability from a virtual perspective in the online learning and collaboration fields. So take, for example, higher education. One of the courses that I designed from an instructional design perspective is getting people to add value-added perspective of
historical significant figures, facts about events that are there. If you look at this week's resources, you can go to a historical community that has podcasts that recap specific learning events that have transpired across our country. I don't want you to think specifically related to an event that happened centuries ago. You can look at anything. If you're looking for a global event, you can talk about elections, changes in government. We seem to be dealing with some catastrophic weather events that are related to impact of human life. There's a lot of different sources out there, a lot of different topics that you can use. Find one of these resources, find a time that's convenient for your learners or your audience, and have them listen to the podcast, listen to the perspective of questions that are being asked. It's like listening to a guest speaker right in the comfort of your own living room or from a virtual sense that are there. So that's really the implementation strategy from an academic sense of using those types of podcasts that are there. They can support single objective-based learning activity creations. They supplement the reinforcement of a larger topic that you're talking about. So in the case of the weather catastrophes that we've been dealing with across the world over the last 6-8 months, you can frame those into a meteorology class. You can frame those into an economics class. You can form those really into a business management perspective, insurance, fraud. You can take any perspective from a single entity of a topic that's there. What makes the podcast so popular is your creativity to be adaptive and reflect that creativity into making the perspective of the content you've chosen to a really actionable item that learners can really dig deep into, understand the perspective and subject matter of the expert that is delivering the information, and extracting the objective that you've defined from there. So that's really how you can do it from an implementation strategy. I really encourage you to use the power of content matter experts. These are areas that you can look at. TED Talks is another one that's become very popular. I guess you can attribute that to be very similar to a video vodcast if you would like to. It's the same similar concept. But again, you're introducing sources of content through the power of digital media into a learning environment. This can be done from an auditory or video perspective. For the benefit of this module, I've chosen to do the audio perspective for the capability of the mobile enhancement and the ability of people to use these things on the go and on demand. So I hope I've given you some ideas on what you can do to complete the activity for this week's module. I hope I've introduced you to some of the more common types of podcasts that are out there, not to mention the single solo podcast that you're listening to. So I hope you really found the information beneficial and are able to apply it to this week's activity. Good luck, everybody, and I'll talk to you in class. Thanks.